Let me ask you something. When was the last time you did something, said something, posted something, made a decision about your own life, and it was purely yours? No audience in mind, no one's approval factored in, no version of yourself performing for somebody else. When was the last time you were just you? If you had to pause on that question, this video is for you. And if you're a man who's 30 or older, and you feel like somewhere along the way you started living someone else's version of your life, the job that looked right, the opinions that fit the room, the version of yourself you maintain so nobody asks questions, then what I'm about to say for the few minutes might be the most important conversation you have this year. Because the age we're living in right now, it is engineered, top to bottom, to make you a fake, and most men don't even notice it happening. Here's what this video is actually about. It's not a motivational speech. It's not a list of habits. It's not going to tell you to journal more or download an app. What I'm going to do today is show you exactly how inauthenticity works, how it gets inside you, how you can't see it until it's too late, what it costs you when you spend your life running from it, and then what it actually looks like to start living as a real man in a world designed to turn you into a performance. I want to be straight with you about something. There is no checklist for authenticity. Any video that gives you 7 steps to living your truth is lying to you. This is harder than that. It requires something deeper than steps. What I'm drawing from is a body of thought that's been tested through some of the hardest human experiences imaginable existentialist philosophers, like Soren Kierkegaard, Albert Camus, Heidegger, Sartre, men and women who stared down anxiety, depression, death, and the total meaninglessness that modern life can produce, and came back with real answers. Not academic answers, not comfortable ones, real ones. There's also a scholar named Gordon Marino, a former boxer, a man who spent years in his own personal hell, who almost didn't survive his 20s, who spent his adult life studying these thinkers and translating what they found into something livable. I'm going to use his work as the spine of what we cover today. Here's what we're going to move through. First, what inauthenticity actually is, and why you're probably already living in it without knowing it. Second, the real cost of performing your life instead of living it, and why most men never see the bill until it's too late. Third, the difference between what Kierkegaard called your concrete self, your ideal self, and your true self, and why most men are living for the wrong one. And finally, what it actually looks like, practically, to start moving towards something real. By the time we're done, I want you to have a clearer picture of who you actually are versus who you've been performing, and a real sense of what to do about it. Let's get into it. I want to start with something that might sting a little. There's a philosopher named Martin Heidegger. Dense guy. Brilliant. He said that most people, most human beings, are not actually living their own lives. They're living what he called the they. The they is the crowd. The ambient voice in your head that sounds like your own thoughts, but is actually the accumulated weight of everyone around you. Your parents, your coworkers, the culture, social media, the men your age that you're comparing yourself to. The they tells you what a man your age should want, what success looks like, what kind of car means you've made it, what opinions are safe to have, what emotions are acceptable to show. And here's what makes it insidious. You don't experience it as pressure from the outside. You experience it as common sense from the inside. You think you want what you want. You think your choices are your own. But a lot of the time, you've been handed a script and you're reading it line by line without realizing there's a script at all. Think about your LinkedIn profile, your Instagram, the way you describe yourself at parties, even the way you talk about your struggles. There's a careful performance in all of it, isn't there? A version of you that gets put out into the world that's been edited, polished, managed. Gordon Marino talks about a generation that has replaced the urgent question of authenticity with selfies, social media branding, and managing your profile. His exact point: it is not who you are, but who you seem to be. And men in their 30s and 40s and 50s are especially susceptible to this. Because by this point in your life, you've made commitments. You've built a public version of yourself. You've told certain stories about who you are for long enough that you've started to believe them. Heidegger called our natural state fallenness, not a moral judgment, just a description. We fall into the comfort of everyday routine, the job, the habits, the opinions, the identity, and we stop asking the big questions. We're absorbed. We're in the crowd. We're binge-watching our own life. And that, he said, is the default state of a human being. Now here's the thing most people don't understand about Heidegger. He said it takes a jolt to pull you out. Some kind of rupture, a diagnosis, a divorce, a look in the mirror at Thram. A moment where the gap between who you're performing and who you actually are becomes impossible to ignore. And the men watching this video, a lot of you have had that jolt. Or you're feeling the early tremors of it. That feeling you can't quite name. That this isn't it. That something is off. That you should be further along, or feel more alive, or care more about what you're doing. That's not weakness. That's a signal. And here's what I want you to understand about that signal before we move on. Most men respond to it by trying to double down on the performance. More grinding, better image management, bigger goals, new achievements to pour the emptiness into. That's the wrong move. And I'll show you why in a moment. But first, let's talk about what inauthenticity actually costs you, because this is the part nobody talks about. That jolt Heidegger talks about? Most men feel it. Very few follow it where it's actually trying to lead them. What I'm about to show you is what happens to the ones who don't, and it's not pretty. There's a word I want to introduce you to. Despair. Not in the everyday sense, not the feeling of being sad or hopeless. I mean despair in the way Kierkegaard used it. And when you understand what he actually meant, it'll reframe the lives of almost every man you know. Kierkegaard made a distinction that modern life has almost completely lost. He separated depression from despair. These are not the same thing. One is a psychological disruption. The other is something deeper, a sickness of the self. Depression is what you feel. Despair is what you are. And here's the most unsettling thing Kierkegaard ever wrote, and I'll paraphrase because this needs to land clearly. Happiness is despair's greatest hiding place. Let that sit for a second. You can be successful. You can be producing. You can have the right car, the right job, the right relationship on paper, and still be in the deepest despair of your life. Because despair isn't about how good things look. It's about whether you're actually living as yourself. Kierkegaard described despair as existing along a continuum. At one end, being completely unaware you even have a self. Just absorbed in the crowd, going through the motions, producing and consuming. Never once asking who you actually are at the other end. Knowing you have a self. Knowing what that self could be, and refusing to become it. That's the most acute form. Kierkegaard called it defiant despair. The man who knows exactly what he should be doing and won't do it. And the primary symptom of both? A desire, conscious or unconscious, to get rid of yourself. Not necessarily in a dramatic way, more like a quiet wish to be someone else. To have a different life. To stop being this particular self in this particular situation. How many men do you know who are quietly living that wish? Who are surviving the week to get to the weekend? Who have mentally checked out of their marriage but stay for the logistics? Who are doing work that means nothing to them but pays well enough to keep the performance going? That's despair. Not depression, despair. A spiritual condition. Marino tells a story about his own life that illustrates this perfectly. When he was younger, he lived by what he called the creed, the NFL, or nothing. His entire sense of self was wrapped up in becoming a professional football player. When that fell apart, and it did fall apart, he didn't grieve football. He grieved himself. He lost the thread of who he was, without that identity to hang on to. He nearly didn't survive it. What Kierkegaard would say about that, and this is the sharp part, is that the man who despairs over losing something he wanted was never actually despairing about the thing. He was despairing about himself. About being stuck with a self that didn't feel worth living, as without the achievement propping it up. This is the trap most ambitious men fall into. We build identities out of external achievements. The title, the income, the status, the body. And when any of those shift, and they all shift eventually, the man underneath has nothing to stand on. Here's what I want you to take from this. If you're 30 plus, and you've been achieving and building and producing, and still feel like something is fundamentally wrong, like you're somehow not more satisfied than you were 10 years ago, despite having more. What you're running into might not be a productivity problem. It might be a self problem. Specifically, you may be living for the wrong version of yourself. Which brings me to what I think is the most practically useful idea in this entire video. And it's next. Most men have been told to chase their dreams, find their passion, realize their potential. And I'm going to tell you why, on its own, that advice might be the most spiritually dangerous thing you can do. Stick with me. Kierkegaard had a framework that I haven't seen articulated this clearly anywhere else. And once you hear it, you're going to start seeing it everywhere. He said every person operates with 3 versions of themselves. There's the concrete self. That's you right now. The life you're actually living, the habits, the job, the relationships, the daily reality. This is the you that gets up in the morning and goes through the actual motions of your life. There's the ideal self. That's the version of you that you're striving toward, the goal, the vision, the man you want to be or want to become, the doctor, the entrepreneur, the built guy, the successful man. This is the self that motivational content speaks to almost exclusively. Most men think the whole game is closing the gap between their concrete self and their ideal self. And so they grind, they improve, they build, they optimize. But Kierkegaard introduced a third self, the true self. And the true self has nothing to do with your station, your achievements, your status, your body, your income, your reputation. The true self is the self that is honest with itself about what it actually values, actually believes, actually is. Not what it performs, not what it produces, what it is. And here's the brutal observation Kierkegaard makes, one that most men are completely unprepared for. You can fully achieve your ideal self and still be in despair. You can become Caesar, and Caesar is still miserable. Because the man who tied his entire sense of worth to becoming Caesar and finally gets there, discovers that Caesar is just another version of the performance, just a bigger stage. The achievement doesn't save you. It never did. It just upgrades the costume. And the man who fails to achieve his ideal self, he's in despair because he can't stand to be himself without the achievement. Either way, if your identity lives in the ideal self and nowhere else, you're trapped. The true self is the only self that actually carries you through. Now, Kierkegaard was a deeply religious man, and his language for the true self was theological. I'll let you take that or leave it based on where you are spiritually. But here's the secular translation that Mourinho offers, and it's useful for any man regardless of his beliefs. The true self is your moral and spiritual core, the kind of man you aspire to actually be, not in terms of what you achieve, but in terms of how you treat people. What you stand for when no one's watching. Whether you're honest with yourself about who you are and what you've done. Whether your values are things you actually live, or just things you claim. Authenticity, in this framework, is the work of becoming the true self. Not performing it, becoming it. And that requires something Kierkegaard called passionate appropriation. Big phrase, simple idea. It means the ideas you claim to believe have to be backed by the way you actually live. This is the part that cuts. Mourinho asks himself a version of this question regularly. He says he whispers to himself, "You always talk as though kindness is central to who you are." Okay, have you denied yourself anything for anyone today? That's the test. Not what do you believe, what do you do? Because authenticity in the existentialist sense is never just about thought. It's about whether your actions and your values are in the same place. The Freedom Riders in the 1960s, college students who got on buses heading south into violence to register voters, knowing they'd likely be beaten, knowing police would stand and watch. That was authenticity on 2 counts. They weren't taking their marching orders from their parents or society. And they were acting on their convictions at real personal cost. That's the bar. Most of us aren't being asked to get on a bus into violence. But the question stands, are the things you say you believe showing up in the choices you're actually making? If your answer is mostly no, you're living inauthentically. And the gap between what you claim and what you do is exactly where despair breeds. Understanding all of this is one thing, but what does it actually look like to start moving in a different direction? What's the practical move for a man who recognizes the problem? Understanding that you've been living inauthentically is valuable. But a lot of men get this far and then get stuck in self-analysis that goes nowhere. The move isn't to spend more time interrogating yourself. It's something more specific. Here's what it actually looks like. Here's the part I want to be very direct about. Authenticity is not a feeling you arrive at. It's not a state. It's not something you discover once and then own forever. It's a practice, a constant one, and it's uncomfortable by design. The first move is this: stop managing your image and start auditing your actions. The culture we live in, the LinkedIn profiles, the highlight reels, the personal brand, trains you to focus all your energy on how you appear. What story you're telling about yourself. Camus had a simple line that cuts right through all of it. In order to be, never try to seem. Don't try to seem kind. Be kind. Don't try to seem brave. Be brave. Don't try to seem like the kind of man who has his life together. Actually, get it together. The gap between seeming and being is the exact location of inauthenticity. Marino tells a story about his time as a boxing writer. He used to carry himself around fighters as though his limited sparring experience made him one of them. He was around Mike Tyson once, and Tyson said, "Guys like you and me," and Marino felt the immediate punch of inauthenticity. He'd pulled off the performance, and it felt terrible. He knew. The body always knows when you're pretending. So the first practical move is this. For 1 week, pay attention to the moments when you feel that punch. When you're performing, when you're saying something because it fits the room rather than because it's true. When you're shaping the story instead of living it. Don't try to fix it immediately. Just notice it. The noticing is the beginning. The second move. Stop running from anxiety and start asking what it's pointing to. Kierkegaard called anxiety the dizziness of freedom. And what he meant by that is, anxiety isn't just a malfunction to be medicated. It's a signal. It shows up at the edge of real choices. It appears when you're actually free to do something different. For men who've been living inauthentically, performing for the crowd, suppressing the real self, building achievements to fill the gap, anxiety tends to spike hardest, right when real change is within reach. You feel it when you think about having the conversation you've been avoiding. When you consider the career change. When you imagine actually doing the thing you believe in, rather than the safe thing. That's not your body telling you to stop. That's your body telling you you're at the edge of something real. Kierkegaard said the person who has learned to be anxious in the right way has learned something ultimate. The point isn't to eliminate anxiety. It's to learn to move through it toward what actually matters. The third move, and this is the deepest one. Get honest about the difference between what you value and how you live. Not brutal, flagellating honesty. Just clear honesty. The kind that asks, is the way I'm actually spending my time, money, and energy in line with what I say I stand for? If you say your family is your priority, but you're checked out when you're home, that's a gap. If you say your health matters, but you've been neglecting your body for years, that's a gap. If you say you value honesty, but you tell people what they want to hear, that's a gap. Every gap is a place where the performance is won over the reality. Closing those gaps, even incrementally, even imperfectly, is what it looks like to move toward authentic living. This isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming less fragmented. Kierkegaard talked about death as one of the things that wakes men up to this. When you take seriously the fact that your time is actually limited, when you stop pretending that there will always be more time to become the man you meant to be, the gaps between your values and your life start to look very different. Ivan Illich, in Tolstoy's famous story, is a successful judge who does everything society says constitutes a good life. Nice house, status, career advancement. And he gets to the end of his life dying, in agony, alone, and realizes that not one meaningful thing got through the performance. He was never real, never present, never actually himself. The tragedy of Ivan Illich is not that he lived badly in some dramatic sense. It's that he lived secondhand. He lived the life that they handed him. And he only understood what he'd lost when there was no time left to recover it. You're not Ivan Illich. You still have time. But time is finite. And the gap between the man you're performing and the man you actually are, that gap has a cost that compounds with every year you let it grow. What we covered today is the framework. But frameworks alone don't change anything. The real question now is, which gap in your own life hit hardest when I was describing this? There's a good chance it's in one of a handful of places. Your purpose, your relationships, the way you handle your inner life, or the way you're actually showing up day to day. I've made a video that goes much deeper into one of the most specific and practical versions of this problem. The one most men in their 30s and 40s are quietly dealing with, but not talking about. If what I said today landed, that video is going to hit even harder. It's linked on screen right now. Watch it next. Here's what I want to leave you with. You already know the difference between performing your life and actually living it. You've known it for a while. You feel it in the moments when you say something you don't mean. Make a choice that doesn't feel like yours. Or look at where you are and feel the quiet weight of how you got here. That feeling isn't your enemy. It's the most honest thing about you. The existentialists, Kierkegaard, Camus, all of them, they were not men who had it figured out. They were men who refused to look away from what was real, who were willing to live in the discomfort of the gap between who they were and who they were supposed to be. That's all authenticity asks of you. Not perfection, not a dramatic transformation, just the courage to stop pretending and start closing the distance between the man you perform and the man you actually are. One choice at a time. One honest moment at a time. That's how it starts.